listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams.
Welcome. You are listening to Power Plug Radio, the home of your throwback jams. I'm sorry, the alcohol has gotten to me already. But anyway, let me try that again. You are listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams. This is Taboo Talk, and you are listening to The African Queen. You can find us on www.powerplugradio.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything else you can think of. Then you could go over to Amazon. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. You can go over to Amazon, YouTube. Oh, there you go. Thank you. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can get us on the Play Store, the Apple Store, and you can also just say, hey, Alexa, play Power Plug Radio. Welcome to Power Plug. We are doing part 3 of our 4-part series on the Black church and the Black community. Pastor JC got caught in traffic, so hopefully he'll be walking in soon. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So our first 2 sessions were on different topics when it came to the Black community. I think our best one was week before last when we talked about, is the LGBTQ plus community actually accepted in the Black church? We got a lot of positive feedback about that. But what we're going to talk about today is the mass exodus from the Black church to more African traditional based religions. And I am one of those people. I left the church, 21 years ago. Wow, I left a long time ago. I was born and raised in 2 different churches. My father's side of the family was AME. My mother's side of the family was Baptist. I was raised going between both of the churches. I think I got disillusioned with the church really early on. Because I asked a lot of questions and I never got answers to my questions. You know what the answer that I got from the preacher? The answer was, you don't question God. That ain't an answer. So it took me a while. I was in my 20s when I chose to leave the church. Now, don't get me wrong. I still go to church when I feel like it. My godmother in my religion attends church faithfully every Sunday, because it is very possible to incorporate the 2 together. You can incorporate the Christian religion in almost any other religion. The religion that I practice is called Yoruba. It is one of the oldest religions in the world. It was the religion that a majority of the slaves that were brought over here practiced. And I know what I'm getting ready to say is going to sound a little crazy, but for those who were fortunate enough, I know you can't think about slaves being fortunate, but for those who were fortunate enough to be bought by masters who practiced Catholicism, they were able to continue to practice Yoruba under the mask of Catholicism, because Catholicism and Yoruba have a lot in common. The saints in Catholicism, what happened was the Orisha, who basically would be the equivalent to a Catholic saint, they were able to mask them underneath the saints. So depending on who you're talking to, a lot of the Cuban-based Yoruba practitioners, they use the saints' names from the Catholic Church. But more of the African-based and the newer converts to the religion will use the Orisha. So when I first got into the religion, Saint Francis of Assisi was the saint that I was told sits on my head. And so it wasn't until a few years later. It wasn't until a few years later that I got introduced to the more African tradition, and it felt right to me. Now, I'm not saying that one religion is better than the other. That's not what I'm saying. But for me, Yoruba was comfortable. It felt right. It. Now, don't get me wrong. You still got crazy people in Yoruba, just like you got crazy people in every religion. But it felt right to me. And so I left and didn't look back. And so, but I did it before it was the thing to do. You're starting to hear more and more and more about people who are leaving the church. And when I was doing my research for tonight, the articles that came up, it was crazy. I was like, I thought I was going to find one or two articles. And I was like, I just had like this plethora of articles that talked about the mass exodus from Christianity. And it was for so many different reasons. And it's not just black folks that's leaving Christianity. It's white folks and Latino folks too. But Latino is the smaller number. They're more faithful to the Christian religion. And when hopefully when Pastor makes it, we can talk about it a little bit more. Let me go to some of our comments. So I want to say hey to everybody who's commenting. Hey, Darius, thank you for being on the show a couple of weeks ago. So Margaret said blind faith was accepted for a long time because they made it into a business instead of a place of safety. I agree. I truly agree. I remember in the late 90s, the early 2000s, all preachers preached was prosperity. I was like, if y'all, I get it. Everybody should be prosperous. But every time I come to church, it don't need to be about prosperity. I need to hear about other things too. And it was a business. It was money. I remember going to a church service with a friend, and I swear to you, her pastor did an offering about 6 times. I was like, how many times can you pass the plate? I mean, I have no more money. You about to get some pennies out of my purse because you feel obligated. Now, be honest. When you go to church and they pass the plate, don't you kind of feel kind of obligated to put something in the plate? You know, even if it's just some change, you got to put something in the plate. And it was like you passed that plate like 5 or 6 times. So, yes, I agree. It has become a business. Not for everyone, but for a large majority. You would hear a lot of churches that, you know, I didn't even know what a mega church was until the 90s. I was like, what the heck? But a mega church, it's like, really? You know who had the first mega church that I knew of? Black was, Price. Reverend Price. He was the first mega church. And I found out about, and then Cleflo, and then T.D. Jakes. And then, you know, it just kept going and going and going. I found out about Osteen, and we're going to talk about Osteen, but I found out about Price because of my dad. My father, because of his health, he couldn't go to church, but my father was raised in the church and he believed in reading his Bible and going to church. So he started watching. I was like, what you mean you watching church on TV? Like, you know, that's for the fanatical pastors. And my dad was like, you know, the people sending the money in. So not only did they have the big church, but then they had all the people watching TV sending the money in. And then you started hearing about the T.D. Jakes and the Creflo Dollars and what was the one who was taking the pictures of himself in the bathroom mirror in the workout clothes and the young men said he had been having sex with them. What was his name? I think he was out of Georgia. I think he's since passed away. Oh, and I can't remember his name. And then it was him. And then, you know, and now we're hearing all of these things. Like you mentioned Joel Osteen. The big mess about Joel Osteen was during the hurricane in Houston. He wasn't letting people in. And it was like, how of all the places that, okay. But then when it got media attention, all of a sudden he opened the doors. So come on now, you know, and then Creflo Dollar in the jet, that one killed me. You know, I mean, because the church already had a jet. Because remember, he used to fly from Georgia to New York. No, he didn't want a bigger one. He wanted a personal one. The church had one, but then he went to the church members and said, God said, I am supposed to have a jet. And they bought it for him. They bought. So the church has a jet and he has a jet. And you know what? I'm not going to say that pastors shouldn't have jets, but here's my thing. if a church has a jet, if my mother if I'm in California, if I live in California and my church is out in California, my mama is in Florida, and all of a sudden my mama gets sick and I can't get the money to get to her before she die, I pay tithes. Y'all need to put me on that plane and send me home. It's the congregation's. If the church belongs to the congregation, the jet belongs to the congregation. So gas that up. I was about to curse, but I'm talking about the church. Gas that up and send me home to see my mother. To me, that would only make sense. And I could go on, and I'm not here to bash the church. But until the pastor gets here, I want to talk about what drove me. There was a couple of things. Church scared me. I'm 51. I turned 51 last week. And when I was growing up, the church was all about fire and brimstone. It was the fire and the brimstone, and when you died, your body stayed down there in the coffin till Gabriel came and blew his horn. And then when Gabriel blew his horn, the dead would rise, and then the dead and the people who were still alive would get judged. And those who were found worthy would go to heaven, and those who were not found worthy would stay on earth, and it would then be hell on earth. Earth would become hell. Imagine being 5 and hearing this. You're like, okay, you know what? I pinched my cousin, so am I going to hell? Think about it. But you're sitting in church and you're hearing this. So for me, I still, to this day, it doesn't happen often, but I have this recurring nightmare that I've had since I was in elementary school. And for those of you in St. Petersburg, my dream went down on the corner of 31st Street and 54th Avenue South. And in my dream, I used to go to Maximo Elementary. I'm walking home from school, and in order to get to my grandmother's house, I wasn't allowed to cross any major streets. So what I would do is I could go straight up 31st, the sidewalk, and then take the sidewalk down 54th to Anastasia, and my grandparents lived there. My grandmother lived there. So right when I get on the corner of 54th and 31st in my dream, this screeching sound happens. The sky opens up, it turns to fire, dead people are walking, people are screaming, cars are having accidents because people are getting pulled up to heaven, and I'm standing there alone crying. And I finally wake up. And it's the same way every single time I had it, but it's only because of the visual that the church gave me that stuck in my head. As I got older, my mom said, I ask a lot of questions. And my go-to, me and my best friend, we like, can I ask you something? and then people be like, oh my God, she about to ask a question. And I asked the questions, and I grew up with the fire and brimstone. When I was 14, my great aunt, who was a tremendous influence in my life, Obie McLean, passed away. And that was the first real funeral where I was actually in the front pew because I was the main part of the family. And I remember sitting there. I was on one side of my daddy. My brother was on the other side. My daddy was holding my hand. And I remember listening to the pastor and looking at the coffin. And I'll never forget it because her casket was pink and green because she was an AKA. And I was just sitting there, and I remember looking at the coffin thinking, oh my God, she's in there. And all of a sudden I heard the pastor say, and to the family, you should take solace in the fact that your loved one is in heaven with God. And I was like, hold up, wait, what? Hold on. What happened to the fire and brimstone and the Gabriel blowing his horn? That's what I heard growing up, and now the story changed. Well, yeah, the story changed because you want to know why? The fire and brimstone wasn't working anymore. It was scaring too many people away from the church. So they changed it up. They reinterpreted what was being said. They calmed it down. And I remember going, but wait a minute. So which one is the truth? So I started asking questions. It's Andy, and she asked questions. And my grandmother was like, well, you should ask such and such. So I went to that person because he was an assistant pastor, and he couldn't answer the question. And so finally I made it to the pastor of my church, and I'm not going to say the church and his name. I'm not going to do that. And when I asked him the question, He answered it. It was not a satisfactory answer. It was a BS answer. And at 16 years old, by this time, I knew it was BS. So what did I do? I followed it up with an additional question. He got frustrated with me, and he looked at me and he said, you should not question God. And I think that at that moment is when I was done. Did I continue to follow the traditions of my family? Yes, because I was still a child. So I couldn't just walk into my mama house and be like, I ain't going to church no more, you know. So the moment I was grown enough to leave, I left. And I pondered. I didn't just make a rash decision. I actually was pondering between being a practicing Sunni Muslim, being a Sunni Muslim, and Yoruba. And Yoruba won for me. It was the one that felt the closest to me. And this, I'm not the only one that has these stories. They all fit in that way. So Darius says, great point. There must be a return to any investment you make. And that's true, you know. And I'm going to give my disclaimer. What I'm getting ready to say is my opinion, along with some other people. And I know everyone's not going to agree with what I'm getting ready to say. But Black folks practice Christianity because of slavery, point blank. We didn't practice Christianity prior to slavery. Our religion and our identity was stripped from us when we were brought over because that was a form of control. And that's why earlier I said that for those who were bought by Catholics who practiced Yoruba, they were able to mask their religion under Catholicism. So they were still able to practice. But for everyone else, you know, it was forced on us, and it was forced on us this way. We were in hell, literally, as slaves. And what they did was they held over us you want to make it to heaven and you want to get out of hell. Well, the way you do that is you be a good little boy and a good little girl, and you obey, because you know you hear the word obey all the time in the Bible. You obey, but you didn't obey God. You obeyed your master. So like if you didn't cause trouble and you did what you were supposed to do and you obeyed your master and you did right, that when you died, you would go to heaven and you would finally be out of this hell. And after how many hundreds of years of this being bombarded, they completely stripped us. And generation by generation that was born into slavery was a generation removed from our traditions that we were raised from the beginning of time. And we were folded into the church. And even to this day, the church is still used as a method of control. And I know that there's some Christians out there that's going to disagree. Taylor said, I grew up old school Pentecostal and all I heard about was hell. Yes. You heard about hell more than you heard about heaven, because they was trying to scare you. In the Catholic Church, you paid, so in the Catholic Church, it was purgatory. So and the rich folks could buy themselves out of purgatory. Did you know that? So back in the day, what would happen was the rich people, they would commit a sin. They would go to the church and they would, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. And they would do so many Hail Marys and oh Lord prayers, and then they would give a lump sum of money to the church. So I went and I raped my daughter's friend, but I'm going to pay the church. So I'm not going to purgatory. I'm buying my way into heaven. So in their mind, they kept going, I could just keep doing what I want to do and just buy my way out of purgatory. Well, eventually purgatory got old. So now they pay penance. And the way they do that, and the Catholic Church makes millions upon millions of dollars, is if you go into a Catholic church, you'll see the candles. So people go in, they light the candles, and they throw some coins. But you think about the number of Catholic churches all over the world. If everybody threw a nickel every day, that's some money. And believe me, they're throwing more than a nickel. The church has always been about, not always, but unfortunately, it has become about two things: money and power. Let's talk about King James. King James was a king who realized he wasn't a good king. He wasn't a good ruler, but he played like he was a good ruler. And so what he wanted to do is he said, I'm going to bring the word of God to the people, because prior to the King James version of the Bible were in other languages, and the only people who could read the Bible were the priests and the pastors of the churches. So no one could read it because they couldn't read those languages. So his thing was, okay, we're going to put the Bible, we're going to translate it, and it's going to be translated into English. And in translating this Bible into English, then we're going to give a Bible to the people. And so the people were like, ooh, King James is a good king. But what they didn't know was one word can change the meaning of a sentence. And he changed meanings to make it easier for him to be and stay in power. He manipulated the church and the Bible to maintain control of the people, even though he played the people and made them think, I'm giving you control. And we can hear stories about that. So one of the big things, and we talked about it a few weeks ago, was homosexuality and the Bible. And the go-to that everyone goes to, and I don't know the actual scripture, but it's Leviticus something. And in the King James version of the Bible, it basically, it's a verse that basically has been translated to homosexuality. And this is from a German translation. If you look at the original word, the way it was worded, it was actually saying men should not lay with boys. It was talking about pedophilia. It was not talking about homosexuality. But when the German whatever church was paid to translate it, they asked them, please make this say homosexuality and not pedophilia. So you basically are saying it was worse to be a homosexual than to be a pedophile. And you paid them to do this. So, and there's many things, because so many people blindly follow. I remember the last church that I was a member to was Bethel Community under Pastor Sykes. And I actually enjoyed Pastor Sykes. And one of the things that made me really like him is he said, when I preach, everyone in here is not going to get the same message from what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is going to hit each person differently. So many times it's cookie cutter. Everybody walk out of there talking about what a pastor said. No, the pastor's message was supposed to be independent to each one of us. Excuse me. So Kamara said, hello, Kamara. That's my classmate from way back in the day. But we still young and good looking. This is why our focus has to be on our relationship with God rather than religion. And I agree. Because, and honestly, other than my family, Kamara's father was one of the first introductions I had to church that was outside of the church that I grew up in. Her father was the pastor of Mount Zion Progressive back when it was that little church that's across the street from the big one now. And then pastor, he built the big church before, unfortunately, he passed away. But I agree. And here's the thing. I am not a Christian, but I believe in God. And that's what a lot of Christians don't realize. Just because I don't practice Christianity does not mean I do not believe in God. I believe in God. I just believe in God a little bit differently than you do. I may not call him God. Just like Muslims, Allah is God. I had an argument with the woman because she swore up and down to me that Allah and God were two different entities. No, they're the same. Everyone doesn't speak English. So, look at the language. So in my religion, we have a hierarchy. We have the what we would consider God. And then you have, the saints that go underneath it. I think for me, the reason why I left and went, I felt more comfortable. I got better answers. I got better explanations, and it felt more real to life to me when I chose to leave and go over to Europe. I have a very good friend who was a classmate of mine, Kimberly, and Kimberly. It was ironic because we didn't hang out then. We had gone our separate ways after high school, and come to find out, her and I were going through the same kind of exodus from Christianity into another religion, and we were both contemplating the same religions. And where I went Yoruba, she went Muslim, and it was both eye-opening for both of us. I feel more of a connection to spirit and God through Yoruba. A lot of Christians look at my religion as barbaric and witchcraft. Okay. What we do in my religion is no different than what they did in the Old Testament. So go back and look at the stuff they did in the Old Testament, and yes, we still do it. But that's my belief system. I do not push my beliefs on to anyone else. If people ask me questions, I will answer them to the best of my ability. But for the most part, I kind of refer them to my godmother because that's her wheelhouse. But I know that for me, I left because I didn't feel welcomed. I heard too much hell. I heard too much hate. Like we talked about a few weeks ago. You're constantly talking about the LGBTQ, the gay this, the gay that, but almost every black church, the choir director is gay. Now, he may not say it outright, and y'all may not recognize it, but we all know he gay. And then you sit up there and you talk about the gay folks so bad, and he's sitting right there directing the choir right behind you. The number of young people who were lost, and the one place they should have been able to go should have been the church. And they're, like Pastor JC said, Reverend JC Pritchard said, the pregnant teen girls, and how they would be set on that front pew and embarrassed and humiliated for being pregnant. But they never brought that young boy who got her pregnant and set her there, because also Christianity can be very sexist. Then when it came to the LGBTQ plus community, they ain't even sit them on the pew. They just kicked them out. And then for those who stayed and stayed in the closet, y'all knew they was gay, and you would talk about them and made them feel horrible. How many people have committed suicide because they had no place to go, including the church? The church is I remember when I went to Catholic school, back then, this was back in the day, the church doors were always open. Most Catholic churches did not lock their doors, so you were welcome to come into that church at any time. And that was what it was supposed to be. But the physical door may have been open, but the spiritual door was not, because once you got in there, you got judged. And it was hard. It was hard for me, and I wasn't judged nearly as bad as some of the groups that I mentioned. One of the things that we're going to talk about on another topic, and I've mentioned this before, Greenleaf. I tried, wasn't that the name of that show? Okay. I tried to watch that show. I did. I think I made it through 4 episodes because it triggered me. Because that uncle who was sleeping with all them girls happens all the time. And if it's not the deacon or the pastor or the whatever in the church, the uncle who doing it or the brother or the cousin or whoever go to church and praise God on Sundays and then turn around after Sunday dinner and do whatever he gonna do to that little girl or that little boy. And there was no true protection. And I felt that. I felt there was no true protection. So I made a choice. And I'm gonna tell you what made it easy for me to make the choice. I had support. My mother told me, you make your own decision. Now, when I first left the church, I didn't tell my grandparents because I couldn't, because I knew I was going to get the, what do you mean? And, you're going to go to hell. And, if you don't accept, if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then you can't pass the gates of heaven. And I'm like, wow. And I remember my mom read me a book, and the title of the book was even Hitler is in heaven. And that was just the title was powerful. But if you can ask for forgiveness, no matter what you're seeing, what it says is that no matter your sin, you can ask for forgiveness and you can go to heaven. So if Hitler asked for forgiveness, then Hitler up in heaven, along with Mussolini and Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy and anybody else that we can name. So I think for so many, what has happened, and especially in the articles that I have read, is that Christianity is no longer palatable. It's not sitting well with people. It's giving them a stomach ache and a headache. So they're going somewhere where they feel more accepted. And unfortunately, it's not the Black church. The number of people who are leaving their churches, they said that people are leaving their churches by the millions. They also said that because of the pandemic, another article that I was reading, it said even more people left in the last year and a half. One, because I guess, they couldn't go to church. And a lot of the people in the article said, so because they couldn't go to church and they really weren't going anywhere else, a lot of them started doing research. They started Googling stuff. They started reading and learning. And they were like, oh, wait a minute. And they said, okay, this isn't what I was taught. I like this better. And so they gravitated towards other religions, whether they were African-based or Islam or Judaism. And by the way, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all derived from Abraham, which I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, these three religions that can't stand each other, but y'all all came from the same place. They all derived from Abraham. So that's powerful in itself to say and to hear. We're almost done. I know that the show was a little short. Unfortunately, I think Pastor JC is still stuck in traffic because he said he was going to try and come straight here. I know that this was a topic and we did it a really short. We will revisit this topic next week. Our final part of our 4-part series is, can two different religions live in the same household? And by Christianity, nah. What is it? You're unevenly yoked? Okay. I disagree. And there are many people out there who will disagree because they have very healthy households that practice two separate religions. But that's one of the things, and hopefully Pastor won't be held up in traffic and we can have a better conversation about that. I welcome you back next week. I hope you all can call in and join us. You are listening to Taboo Talk on Power Plug Radio.
You're listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams.
When we